things that we want to get out. Right, well, welcome everybody. It's great to have a good crowd with us again today. We're going to make a start of the Black History conversation today by finding out some of the things that have been going on recently and things that are coming up, because one of the things that we want to do is that we want to help people access information about Black history, and there is now more and more information online and in publications and in different places. So we're going to start with a PowerPoint presentation. Get this started. Right from the start. Right, can you see that, folks? Is that all right?
Yes, thank you.
And I'm fine about you having your mics on or off to comment. If any of you notice Hillary arriving, then let me know, because I won't be able to see, otherwise I can't see what's on my screen. Okay then, so Windrush, the departure was last week, would have been the anniversary of the departure from Kingston last week. And this week we want to find out more about the psychological implications of the people who were left behind. And this, according to Dr. Hilary Robertson-Hickling, who is a specialist in this field, and I'll tell you more about her. She's going to talk about that and also help us with other activities that we're going to be doing over the next few weeks as we come up to Windrush Day, which we have now. Now, for those of you who don't know what Windrush Day is, we'll explain when we get to Hilary's section. But it's also this week marking the first anniversary of George Floyd's death. And I've just been watching, we have a program here called Planet America, and lots of reviews on what's happened and what hasn't happened since that time. But it's certainly, you know, this is living through history, isn't it? Then we're also going to be, as I've said before, setting up a website called Unlocking Black History, so that we can provide information about all sorts of different stories which are of interest to inform from different countries and different perspectives around the world. So that's our first one. So now click. So I just picked this out from the Voice newspaper to recognise that there's an event coming up at the weekend, Stand Up to Racism. So there's a link there to the Voice newspaper. And also I put a link to a British Black Voices survey, which is also being promoted by the Voice newspaper. So that might be of interest to some people. And then a number of things have happened in the UK, and it may be that you want to share some of the things that you know in a moment that have happened since Black Lives Matter. Yes, we know about the Colston statue and lots of other things that have happened about those sorts of things. But I'm really interested in what museums and other organisations are doing in terms of support of Black Lives Matter. So I found this is in Bristol's Free Museums and Historic Houses. And museums are now also having to make their displays and exhibitions available online. So there are more and more opportunities coming up. So I thought that was quite an interesting point. Now, in order for me to see all of you, yeah, so what things have you found that have happened over this past year, changes in organisations? Been anything going on in North Wales, Jessica?
Well, it's interesting. The Welsh government have got a real focus now on anti-racist education. So I was talking with somebody earlier on in the week, Adult Learning Wales, and they really want to engage with this agenda of looking at the curriculum, not just in primary schools and secondary schools, but also at FE level. So I look forward to being involved in that.
That's really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, as you know, I've been quite busy with assessment over the last 3 months, so I haven't been able to do anything personally myself, but I am still sitting on different committees and, trying to make change from within organisations that I'm linked with.
It is really interesting in Wales because that's where I've got strong links. Professor Charlotte Williams led a review into what needs to be in the curriculum. So that's a really interesting aspect. Okay, right. Okay, David, what would you consider in Scotland as being the impact over this past year?
I think there's been a number of things. I think that there is now a review of what museums in Scotland, how they're presenting Scotland's involvement with slavery and with empire. And I'm really pleased that out of our discussions, one of the things that has happened is that Sati and myself are both part of one of the subgroups of that review, which is overall being led by Jeff Palmer. So,
yes.
And one of the things I've learned from our discussions, I think, is the enormous importance of having views from elsewhere. I mean, we can so easily end up talking to ourselves about and even when we're focusing on something that is like the history of slavery, the history of empire, we can still end up having that discussion without including people who are who've been impacted by that. So I think that's been a really positive result of our discussions. So I'm very, very pleased about that. Situating with the curriculum in Scotland is rather different because Scotland doesn't have a national curriculum in the same way as England and Wales. More is left to schools, but there is a commitment from Scottish Government to make more material available. And just earlier this week, a documentary was broadcast on BBC Scotland, and now that will be available on iPlayer, but I think only within the UK, on the first Black international football player, Andrew Watson. It's a very good documentary, but it's presented presented by and through the experience of Mark Walters, who is a Black football player who signed for Rangers in Scotland in the 1980s and was the subject of most appalling abuse. So I think I think that is a bit of a wake-up call to Scotland to acknowledge some of these aspects of its history, including its modern history of racism.
That's really interesting. Really good. And I don't know, Lucy, what would you say has been going on in England? Lucy, turn your...
Sorry, I'm unmuting myself. Yeah, well, in relation to my area, in universities, I mean, there is this whole move to what they call decolonize the curriculum. And at my university, we have set up groups, including of students of colour, to discuss about the way forward for this. So it's an ongoing thing, and it is now being taken very, very seriously. But on the other hand, you have these, so-called culture wars with very nasty attacks on these kind of attempts by the right wing, not within the universities, but from outside. So it's quite worrying. I think there are some people, I'm sure you know about this, who are very defensive about anyone daring to make connections between the country houses and the sort of things that are seen as essentially British and wonderful actually expose their links to slavery and colonialism, that whole history. So there is this kind of backlash. But as far as the university is concerned, I think we are making some real effort to change. But it's also about attracting students of colour. And for history, I think it's quite difficult because history is our student bodies are pretty white, and I think it goes back to how history is taught in schools, because it's taught very much as they ignore the Black British history, and I think a lot of children of colour in Britain don't really see history as relevant to them, and that's really got to change at that level, not just at the level of universities. We've got to get them to the universities in the first place. So it's a uphill struggle, but it's very good that these things are being taken seriously at last.
Right, I think that's really interesting, and it would be really good to get either Dr. Corinne Fowler or a representative from the National Trust to tell us about what their plans are after the report came out and how things are changing. Caroline Sansom usually joins us, and she's a volunteer at a National Trust property, Penryn Castle, which was built on the proceeds of the wealth of plantation work, enslaved workers in Jamaica. And they have got an exhibition from the colonial countryside project that Corinne Fowler led. And she said that because she's knowledgeable about Black history and these things, and certainly the stories there, she was able to really tell visitors so much more than she felt probably other volunteers, other guides there were able to. But she said she had some really interesting conversations, and people found it really eye-opening, and that was a good way forward. So thank you.
That sounds great. I'd love to hear her stories about that, because I know that Corinne has got, these groups of kids involved in kind of rewriting some of the information that's given out when people go to these stately homes or castles or whatever, and actually give them the different stories. So yeah, and I think a lot of people, I mean, on the one hand, there are people who are kind of horrified and don't want this national story to be attacked like that, but other people are really interested and think, because a lot of people just simply don't know about that, and it's that level, because they were never taught in schools. That level of ignorance is very, very widespread, because it's just not been in our education, unfortunately.
No, and certainly when you go to National Trust properties, the Black history elements of properties, often the colonial links, are not emphasised. They're just left for people to wander past and not think through. So what about in Canada, Vaughan? Just while you're talking, David, can you just perk up, because I need to phone up Hillary and see if she's got the links and everything, that make sure there's no problems. Okay.
Yep.
What's happening in Canada then?
Because I'm really not part of any public
We can't hear you very well.
Oh, can you hear me now?
I can. Beautiful, thank you.
Okay, I was just trying to explain that I'm not part of any academic organization or a public organization. I probably don't have a lot to report, other than I attended a virtual workshop yesterday, organized by a local library. You actually sent me a link to it. Yeah, but I'd already registered even before you sent it. It was interesting because the speaker. Are you trying to say something, Liz?
No, carry on.
Okay, because the speaker was kind of was looking at systemic racism and the way it plays out on various strategies of society. She actually shared some information about the way young children are experiencing it in schools, and the way in which schools are trying to handle it, which when the students themselves found inadequate, decided to start organizing themselves. And I found that interesting. She also talked about the way it impacts employability and all of that. But outside of Canada, in the news, it's been interesting to hear over the last few days. France's apology for their role in the Rwandan genocide, as well as Germany's apology for the genocide in the at the beginning of the 20th century of people in I think Mozambique. Yeah, where there was a lot of death. In fact, they also even had concentration camps and things like that. And Germany is now offering to invest $1 billion over the next 10 years or thereabouts in that country. But apparently, the particular ethnic group that was most affected is not satisfied with Germany's apology and the offer of $1 billion investment, because it's not going to come to the communities directly. Most of the community have been dispersed, and they were not even involved in any of the negotiations that led to Germany's announcement and all of that. Yeah, so I found those interesting.
Bunmi, your microphone's grammatical.
Oh, you didn't hear me?
Not just the last comment that you made.
No, just that I found all of that interesting.
Yes, I'm fascinated by what you're saying, because this library, and this is another point, what a library is doing to promote Black history. Well, there's this library that I came across in Canada called Vaughan Library.
Yeah.
And they've been doing some really good presentations. They record most of them, but the first one I saw, which was really fascinating, and I've tried to contact the speaker because that wasn't recorded. That was fascinating. So they're looking at all sorts of different aspects, aren't they? So that's great.
This was my first time of attending one of the.
Yeah. But I think they're available online, possibly.
Yeah.
Sati, what's going on in Nigeria? How did that story of what happened to Black people, to George Floyd in the States, and perhaps a greater realization of the challenges that that so many African descent families, the problems that they experience. Has there been anything in your world?
Well, nothing organized as the protest in Europe or America, but individuals, communities, particularly the academic community, people who are really embarrassed by the events leading to the death of George Floyd, and various ways these were expressed were in seminars, but not particularly organized for George Floyd, but where the opportunity provided itself, people spoke against it. But like I always said, we also have our various situations at home in which Blacks are killing Blacks, and security, particularly in Nigeria, is something that is really, really worrying. People are killed on a daily basis, and people are kidnapped on a daily basis. And insecurity here, death here seems to be more normal than the isolated case of George Floyd. But then both situations, the situation in Nigeria and the George Floyd situation, is regarded as a big embarrassment to humanity.
Yes. It certainly brought, a lot of people together, I think. And Ange, I haven't asked you, what do you think in England, or anybody else want to comment? Ange?
I'm also not involved with any institutions at the moment and are not in a good position to comment. There was just one thing that I did want to comment on, though, because in the last 2 weeks, where I have been most involved has been in the demonstrations in support of Palestinians. And for the first time, there has been real linkage between people in the Palestine Solidarity Campaign and the demonstrators and the Black Lives Matter movement, including using posters and flags that say Palestinian Lives Matter, and a sense of linkage when the issues are comparable, which is interesting, and it will be interesting to see where that goes in terms of wider public response, if that makes any sense.
It
Yes.
does. I feel exactly the same way as you. Yeah, it's been exciting to see some connections being made about
That's right.
about Palestine and the fact that Palestinian lives matter.
Yes. Yeah.
Martin?
Yes, let me just get off mute. I just say one thing that relates to London. Where the Black Lives Matter debate has started to jog people's memory to include Asians, particularly that were indentured laborers, because while they haven't suffered as the Black Africans did through slavery, they were used by the British colonial powers as effectively paid slaves. And in London and in parts of England, the impact of the indentured laborers when they left East Africa has affected migration and immigrants here tremendously. So, for instance, the London Museum is doing research and going to re-curate its museum on his black slavery, but it's also going to give important emphasis on indentured laborers. And when it comes to places like Tilbury, the lady later today hopefully is going to talk about the arrival of the Windrush. Tilbury had, in a way, a different relationship with Africa, particularly on the East African side. So the indentured labor issue is coming in to make the debate and the history analysis more complicated.
I think it's really interesting, isn't it? And I know David Aberdeen and Juanita Cox and colleagues, a number of people have been involved in developing this a new centre. I'm afraid I can't remember what it's called, at Warwick University, which is looking at indentured labour, and we're going to be having that as a focus. So it's interesting that, you know, it's not just us that's, or I feel I've woken up to the fact that indentured labour nearly needs looking at, and the implications, because what was happening, for those of us who are not historians, to realise just how many human beings were being transported, whether it was trafficked or whether it was tricked or how it happened, but the number of people who were moved. I mean, in Australia, there's something called blackbirding, and that was bringing in islanders from the Torres Straits to work on the plantations, the sugar plantations in Queensland. And as you say, the number of Indian people who were moved to East Africa, and then the ongoing issues and problems since then. So that's really fascinating. So keep your eye on that, Willie Martin. And,
yes.
And do you mind sending me the link to the Tilbury talk again later on today? If you could put it into the chat, that would be even more efficient. I don't know how you can manage that though. So that's really interesting.
Fine, I'll do that. But also the East African Middle East slave trade is something that is being linked a bit more, because in practice, slavery started possibly earlier in East Africa than it did on West Africa. And the Arabic speaking people were from a very early time exporting slaves from East Africa up north. And that tends to be ignored a bit. And anyway, I'll let you carry on.
No, it's okay. That's really fine. Thank you. Is there anybody else that wanted to add anything on this? And I can
It's
just
to say that the Arab slave trade was not just concentrated in East Africa. It also affected other parts of sub-Saharan Africa. And
yeah.
it started long before European slave trade started in Africa.
Yeah. Yes,
Yeah,
that's something to look at again.
I'd agree, but also it was an important reason why the colonialists started to scramble for Africa, because one of the arguments was, oh, the Arabic people are creating slavery in Africa, so we Christians should go in and help to protect these countries. So the Arab slavery was a driver for Western European colonialism, not least Livingstone, because Livingstone spent more time on East Africa and was talking about the Arabs than he did in West Africa.
Mm. Right. So this was the Vaughan Public Library that presentation that Bunmi was just talking about, which was at some impossible hour for me. So I'm afraid I'll have to watch the catch up. But it's really interesting that it's about once a month. They have a program. They put it out on Eventbrite, and they've got some really good speakers, but it's a really interesting example of a library doing something. I won't give you the detail of, read all through the detail of this one. So what I'm hoping is that I can send this PowerPoint to you, and then you can, if you want to, you can go through. Also, there was an interesting story that came up on one of the sites I was looking at about this lady who she refused to move in a cinema, and I just it just inspired me to think that we need to look at film and cinema. And Seema, who joined us last week, her father is a professor in Trinidad, and he's a professor of film, and so he's going to come on and talk about the impact of film in telling stories about Black history. So I thought that's kind of linked with me. Anyway, when she was pardoned of her conviction, but after she'd passed, and she became the first Canadian woman to be featured on the $10 bill. So there you are, a little bit of Canadian history there.
Yeah, Nova Scotia, Canada.
Right, there's really interesting things. I've spoken to Hilary Hickling, and she'll be joining us presently. So if any of you notice her coming on screen, just say to me she's on screen. Otherwise, I have to keep checking out here. Okay, there's lots of interesting things happening with the new director, Matthew Smith, at the newly named Centre for the Study of Legacies of British Slavery. So I did a little bit of research on this. I've got so many other things I ought to be doing, but I just got fascinated because their newsletter came out. The picture on the left over here, this was a book that was produced really in the early days by Catherine Hall, Nicholas Draper, who's the previous director, which I hadn't seen was a book. I didn't know there was a book to go to the website, so that was interesting. See if we can get hold of that. To look back at the origin of the story, because this is such an incredible resource. It is an amazing resource. And now they're going to look more at not just the slave owners, but at the enslaved people. And so there's a lot of information here on the site. They've changed the logo so that it's not that horrid logo of one white man pinching money out of another white man's pocket, and I think this reflects a different leadership. So it's the images of the sealing wax, but contrasted with the feature of the Adinkra symbol, which means vitality, renewal, and the greatness of the sun. So of thought going on there. Now, there are some great presentations going on, as I say. The tarnished past of the, those of you who are in higher education, higher education and the business of slavery. Now, this is Wednesday, the 2nd of June, but it's all booked up, but you can get on the waiting list. And apparently it's the second time this has happened. So the sooner you can get to hear about these things, then I do hope that they record it. And if they record it, then we'll be putting this information onto our site as we move on. And then this is David. Don't know if you want to say anything more about this, David, but the Jamaican Observer, and there's the link to the actual article to say that this is the pressure that David Alston and colleagues are putting on about this reparation.
Yeah, I mean, I've talked about it before, so it's our attempt to get some funds held by Scottish charity, money that was made in slave trading, to get that returned to Jamaica.
Yeah, right. I apologise for that. I don't know how to go backwards. Oh, you're down here. Here.
I think one of the interesting things we'd only recently realised, there's been a great deal in the news over the last couple of weeks, particularly about the statue of Cecil Rhodes at Oriel College in Oxford. And that's there because Cecil Rhodes gave £100,000 to Oriel College. Well, the bequest that we are talking about, which was 80 years earlier, was £120,000. So it's on a larger scale than the scandal of Rhodes' involvement with Oriel College.
Very interesting. And the photograph is of Vereen. Thank you, David. Is of Vereen Shepherd, and Vereen Shepherd does this really brilliant radio show every Saturday morning. I think it is, isn't it, David? Saturday. And
yes, that's right. Yeah.
Friday, is it? I think it's Friday. Is it Friday?
No, Saturday. I think Saturday mornings, Jamaican time. I think it goes out.
Yeah, Jamaican time. And it's to help children who are learning about history in school. Well, isn't this a good idea, you know, having a history radio program? So Vereen invites in a range of guests. The program goes on for about 2 hours, I think. She has some great music, brilliant guests, and all these wonderful Jamaican adverts going on in between whiles. And she is the director of the Centre for Reparation at the University of the West Indies, and she also has major responsibilities. She's on various United Nations committees and things to do with reparation. She's a fantastic woman. Now, I'm hoping that she will join us, but the book that she's holding up there is Britain's Black Debt by Professor Hilary Beckles, and when he was launching that book, he came to Birmingham University, I think we were at, a conference that we were running, and he spoke about that, and he did the most awesome PowerPoint. In those days, I didn't have the nerve to ask if we could have a copy, but it was so wonderful, and it was some time back, because it just, you know, the scale of the finance is phenomenal, and that's a really interesting book. I think it's produced by Ian Randall, or it might be the University of the West Indies Press. So thank you very much, David. That's an amazing story. We keep on. I've got no news on our reparation project that we're working on. So have I gone forwards or backwards? Gone backwards. Right, click. Right, okay then. And then I fell upon the fact that Eventbrite has a Black History section. So there's all these things that you can watch that are related to Black history. You can pick and choose. So this is certainly one that I picked because I've heard Professor David Olusoga speak before, and he's absolutely fascinating and has such a wide perspective. I just hope he's going to be adding some more in about perhaps Scottish history and Welsh history and Irish links with Black history. It was a bit English focused when he came to speak with us in Wales, but that should be a really interesting presentation. And then And we've got Lucy with us, so that's really lovely. I just wanted to say, if any of you wanted to look up, this would be interesting, because Lucy's going to speak to us about this story of the children of the Black GIs in Britain. But there's a wonderful exhibition. It's on the Mixed Museum site. So Lucy, Professor Lucy Blund, who is with us now, there's the book. So if anybody wants to get the book and read the book, so you can ask questions, that would be fascinating. Lucy's joining us in a few weeks' time to make the presentation. And we're thinking at the moment of the challenges of the Windrush generation, and particularly young people who were brought over to Britain. But this is another wholly different story where these children just didn't really understand their heritage and weren't told. And Lucy's work is absolutely fabulous. So that's really, really good. So thank you, Lucy, for being here as well to get a feel of what our sessions are like.
Thank you.
Okay, so also found other information. This clip is from Mix Britannia, which is another TV series. I don't know if you know any more about that, Lucy. I can't recall now. But.
Yeah, I was involved in it. So it's a 3-part series that came out in the autumn of 2011, but it's on YouTube now. And I was involved in the first. It's about the whole history of mixed race people in Britain in the 20th century. And it's in 3 parts. So I was involved in the first part, which takes you up to the war. The second part opened with the presenters, George Alagaya, you may know, Sri Lankan, fantastic man, goes off to meet his brother-in-law, the man who's married to his sister, who's one of these people born to a Black GI and a British woman. And then he's put in Bernardo's home. And then there's another person in the program. And I just thought, my goodness, it's amazing. I don't know anything about this. And then 2 years later, I was working on something else. I went to see if anyone had written about it. And really, so little had been written. So I went and found, I advertised, can people come and talk to me, who were these children who were in their 70s by this time. So that's it. So it's a really good 3-part series. As I said, the first part's up to 39. Then it's the war and beyond. And the third part is about the present day, well, up to 2011. And it was done for 2011 because of the census. I mean, mixed race is a category that was introduced in 2001, actually, the first time, but then you have the next census. So I think the idea was interesting to have a whole history about mixed race. And this website that's run by my friend Shamin Caballero, if you want to look at the whole website, the whole museum is called the Mixed Museum. It's about mixed race people in Britain, but she's hosting my exhibition, which is based on my book, but it's expanded because more and more people contacted me after the book came out 2 years ago. More and more people, I'm one of those, or my father was one of those, so I put up their stories. So it's www.mixedmuseum.org.uk.
Hello.
And you go into that and you scroll down and you find there's a really interesting exhibition about mixed Irish. And then there's an exhibition about the so-called brown babies. This term, brown babies, was a term that was invented by the African-American press in the States. I think it was Pittsburgh Courier, which was an African-American paper. They called these children the brown babies, and they wanted to have them out there, but the British government blocked it. That's another whole story. So yeah, do look at that. I mean, that's obviously just all up there online and free. And my book is going to be in paperback, but not till September. But I think it's still quite cheap. I mean, it's hardback, but you can get it quite cheaply.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And so the Mixed Museum, it's a fascinating concept because it's actually an online museum.
Yeah.
And there's lots of information. And this is the example of one of the exhibitions on the Mixed Museum website. So it's mixedmuseum.org.uk. mixedmuseum.org.uk. That's why
you've got it up there. You've got it up there. Brilliant. Yeah.
It's absolutely fascinating.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. That was Hilary, who's struggling to get through on the Zoom, but she's on her way now, so that's good. Right, let's just do another couple of these slides then. So history in the making. Yes, this was just something that I wanted to see if anybody had followed up on. The Home Office citizenship test. There was that big campaign. Do you remember when I don't know how many historians signed a correspondence with the government? So it'd be interesting to find out what happened there. Let's see what the next one is. And these were just a couple of things, that opportunities for children. Now there aren't many, as we said. There was something we mentioned earlier that you could get into, but this is a special organization that just is putting on things for black children, for black history. You have to pay for this one. Everything else that I put up is no cost. So that's interesting to see, because if we're thinking about how we're going to teach children about black history, then obviously the way things are have moved with the pandemic, that so much is now done online, and that's one of the projects that the Jamaica Heritage Links is looking at moving forward with. And then also Ireland and the slave trade. There's a link there to a very interesting presentation. It's a few years back, but it's really interesting, and I do apologize I didn't put the name of the person who's produced that. Right, I'm going to stop my sharing now because we have Hilary Hickling with us at last. That's lovely, Hilary. Okay, so I'm just going to check, Hilary. We've got right, okay, so we've got, oh, David, thank you very much indeed. David's put in the chat the contact for the Amina Garfor Institute, which is the institute which is looking at indentured labour, and that's fascinating. And we've got another one again with David told us about the episode on the BBC with Mark Walters talking about the footsteps of Andrew Watson, the footballer that you spoke about earlier. And yes, Bumney, I have to split the PowerPoint into 2 parts so that I can send it, because I haven't got my Dropbox things organized. So that's fine. So there's a few more slides. So when we get to the end of the session, we'll just go through the rest of them so that you, if you're interested, or you can just check it out on your own email. So that's good. All right then. So it's wonderful, Hilary, to have you with us again. Hilary, we've talked this week, and you were saying that you suspected that little would be said in Jamaica this week, the week of the anniversary of the departure. Hello, Poppet, how are you? Oh, this is lovely. Are you going to join us, are you now?
Bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye, darling. Bye-bye, darling. Bye-bye. Yeah.
Okay.
You can get on with that good playing, please. That's lovely.
Oh, yes.
Bye-bye, darling. Bye-bye.
I'll soon come.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
No, you can't stay with me. Come, let's go.
Bye.
I'm coming, yes.
We're making it too much fun. I'll tell you a story. My granddaughter was very, very nervous doing online learning at 6. And she actually used to sit on my knee while I was doing meetings and things to see that it was a normal, everyday activity. So when it was her teacher trying to teach all these
Yeah, I'll soon come, Chin. I'll soon come, okay? I talk to this person, and then I come and talk to you.
Henry was saying that there probably wasn't much going on about the Windrush departure, but it's certainly something that we want to look at. And when I say we, it's the learning unit and the link with our Jamaican colleagues. So I'm going to be calling a meeting of Jamaican colleagues and myself.
Okay.
So lovely.
Okay, well, the person who helps to take care of him, she doesn't come until a little while later. But what I'll do is I'll just go ahead. One of the things morning everyone, is that there were a lot of children left behind. It's a good place to start.
Yeah.
And that then resulted in, I guess there's been a bit of silence in terms of those children over the years, because we realize that there are people who have suffered the long-term effects of being left behind. Let me just give him some milk and put him to sleep.
We'll talk amongst ourselves. We've been doing quite well up to now. So we'll go back to the PowerPoint, shall we? Right, where's my share screen gone? There we are. Right, make good use of our time. Okay, this was interesting, but I didn't put the link for it. It's a history of the police and monitoring groups, so you'd have to look that up for yourself. That's something else that came up on Eventbrite. And then in Nottingham, I just wondered about this one, the Great Nottinghamshire Local History Fair. Don't ask me why this popped up, but it probably would have been on Eventbrite. And I just looked at that, but couldn't find anything about Black history in that. So I thought that's something that Simon might follow up. And then this Sunday, this organisation called Black History Walks puts on some really interesting sounding talks. And I think they're free. Yes, they are free. And this one is British slave owners tracking the money and the story of the enslaved. Thought that's an interesting one for some of the project work that I do. So that will be, you don't have time to do anything else except watch things on YouTube. So I found this as well. This is promoting a book, but this came off the website of the slave ownership site. But I thought that was interesting. Britain's history and memory of the transatlantic slavery, with case studies. So and there's all of the first chapter that you can read on the Amazon thing. So that's interesting.
Okay. So,
right, then you're back with us.
Right? Yes, I've given him some milk and something to keep him busy.
Milk and
bribery, I think it's called. But anyway, yeah. So we begin by recognizing that the departure, which was on the 24th in 1948, that people, all different kinds of people left. And some didn't tell anybody they were going, they just got ready and left. And some of them, of course, have left family members. And perhaps you're all aware of how difficult it was to get the family who was left behind to join the family in Britain. So there were all of the problems relating to what they call the bonding, when the family finally would get together, although some never did get together. And so some people set up new families in England, because many people had gone to go for 4 years, they said, and then eventually it was 40 years. And so there's a lot left hanging, and a lot of unfulfilled expectations, and also many difficulties. So there has been very little written on this end. In fact, last week a colleague of mine said her mother found some photographs of her aunt who left Savlamar in Westmoreland, beautifully dressed, came to Kingston with her suitcase and set off to England. And her family, of course, was quite shocked. But anyway, she went, and there's a beautiful photograph of this family, of these people in England who have gone, they've gotten married, they've come and set up a new life, they've done all kinds of things, but there's a lot left unresolved. That's the word I was thinking about at home. And there is not very much written. I have myself been searching, and there are a few other people about what happened in Jamaica, where most of the people came from. Now, some of the people were people who had been veterans of the Second World War, and who had come back to Jamaica and found that the economy and so on was in a shambles. Because to be very honest, the colonial authorities left the colonies in a mess. And so people's wages and all sorts of things were impossible. And so some people decided to go back to England. And of course, it is well known that the man who later spoke about blood running was a very same man who came to Barbados. And I'm not aware of when he came to Jamaica to recruit people to come to work in the hospitals and in the underground and so on. So, and I think to complicate matters, many of the people subsequently, like in the early 50s, they didn't really want to go to England. They wanted to go to America. But to go to America, I think the law changed in 1952, which made it, which included Ireland. So there was a very narrow room for Black people to go to America. So England it was from 1948, I think, to 1962. So during that time, as I said, there were mixed fortunes, to put it very nicely. And so we have this districts, villages in Jamaica where many people went, because usually what would happen, one person would go find a job somewhere to live, and then other people would come. And so what we really have on this end is a situation where we don't actually know what happened to some of those people. And some of those people's lives were upended and their families in Jamaica were left dangling. So, okay, fast forward to England then. So for 3 to 4 generations, we have had people who went to England, and their fortunes, of course, varied. Although you are all based there, so you understand much better what actually happened on the ground. So it could have been that you would have difficulty finding housing and finding work and being generally unwelcome, but also I think steeped in this, I will call it mythology of returning home. And I don't know how many of you have been away from your homes and you have this desire and longing to go home. And of course, when you go home, it's not as you thought it would be. So I have been particularly aware and looking at issues of the people's economic and mental health over these decades. So let's fast forward to right now then. So I myself, I'm 67. And so I have been quite shocked to see people who went to England when they were 5 or 7 years old, but 50 years later or more, they are finding that they really don't belong in this place. They've paid their taxes, they had a job, and so on. And so the problems that have really resurfaced, which have been there all the time, are the ones that I guess are causing our minds to be addressed today. What is to happen to the people who have been there all of this time for 3, 4 generations and suddenly are finding that they once again are being uprooted? So this uprooting is now generational. So then you come, so there's from the time in which there is the forced migration in the time of slavery. And then you have all of the difficult times in the late 19th century where people, including my grandfather, they went to Panama, you went to Costa Rica, you went to Cuba, you went to America to find work. And perhaps one of the most important things is that the kind of work that Black people could find was not well paid or of the highest quality. I think nowadays it's being called the first responders. In America, they call them first line, front line. And so people have had to, in fact, during the early 20th century, the governor of Jamaica tried to stop the people who wanted to go and help to build the Panama Canal, although there was no work in Jamaica. So there's been a constant battle to find an economically viable way to live. And that continues to be a challenge, of course, that we have today. So the people who went to England, and I'll just give you 2 examples. While my late husband and I were there, that's now 20, 21 years ago, we met this man, these 2 men, and they said they came from the same place in Jamaica. And as young men, they went to England. One's girlfriend was due to have a baby, so he had to send money out of £3 back to Jamaica to his mother to help to, prepare for the baby. He had to pay rent in Birmingham. And he talked about how difficult it was. £3. Another man, his friend, now was speaking to us to say, I got a job as a bus driver. People put feces in my post box. People spat on me. People cursed me. And when he was telling us this story, we said to him, have you told your children about this? He said no. But he was reliving this terrible experience of unwelcome and unbelonging. But he had, of course, he was by then there. And unlike America, where you can get 2 jobs or 3 jobs, in England, you had 1 job, and that job, that money didn't go very far. So I keep on speaking about the economics that drives people to leave their homes and go to look for work, and then to find that their circumstances there are even more tenuous than where they came from. So what is to be done is really, I guess, the thing that you all are thinking about. What is to be done? First of all, one has to acknowledge, and this is now going to be something that I recognize. Many people from Ireland and Scotland and Wales and England live across the dominions, what used to be called, whether it's Canada or Australia or Jamaica or the United States. And those people are welcome because they are white people. On the other hand, the people who are from the Indias and the Jamaicas and so on have, no matter how qualified they are, have the greatest difficulty in finding a home. And I'm increasingly thinking about the need for people to have dual citizenship, that people can belong in more than one place. And when we talked about globalization and the world and so on, why is it that I cannot be a Jamaican citizen and a British citizen? And as I say that, I have to give you an example from my late husband's life. So he was part of whom I describe as an Anglophile family. His mother studied music in Bristol, and his grandfather and so on were colonial civil servants. And one of the things about his life was that his father used to get home leave and they went to England on holidays. So, so he had the experience of going to church, and the people beside him got up and moved. Of course, he had had a white pastor in Jamaica, a Presbyterian minister. And he had gotten, he went to University of the West Indies and he got a scholarship to St. Thomas's, which he described quite an interesting experience, where most of the men there were people who went either rowed or played rugby or whatever, and he, of course, was from outside. But part of the question that he said, whenever I completed these studies, I had to run away from England. I couldn't stay. So he knew all about England, and he was there, and he had family who were, my husband's family are from black to white, people, every color in between. So he has a sister married to an Australian, and he has a sister who is involved with a Rastafarian in the country. So we have all of the contradictions within our own family. But when we went to work in Birmingham, that was in about 1995 up till 2000, and we worked in Birmingham where all of what happened. He said, Hillary, when it was time for us to leave England, I will have to go, otherwise I think I'm going to die here. Why? Constant pressure on the job. So he had also done some of his studies in Scotland, in University of Edinburgh. And he said, if I remained in England, the constant pressure on me, my health and well-being, I would die. And I have thought about that because we returned to Jamaica, and well, the rest is no history. But I want to say that even those who think they belong don't belong. And even those who belong feel a sense of alienation. And so the world of today, of 2021, is about us trying to see if we can find a way to, what is the word? Repair some of these breaches of history, recognize what has happened and do something about it. I am absolutely amazed at some of the things that I have read and understood. I fortunately met Amelia, a gentleman in Jamaica. She interviewed myself and a colleague. And she has used all of her social capital, et cetera, to help to expose some of these obviously wrong things that have happened. I mean, you know, when you think about the costs of people getting the necessary paperwork, I think it's something like £900 to get your the equivalent of your residency. And then it costs thousands of pounds in terms of issues of relating to work. Where do people find this money from? And wages in Britain are still very low for the people who work in the social services and so on. Where would the people find this money from? So how to repair today's breach? So issues of reparation. And this is a personal question. The colonizer and the colonized have literally been in bed for 500 years. They sleep in the same bed. They procreate. They create all sorts of people. How is it there is such a sense of unknowing? How is it that I don't know you who have been sleeping together for 500 years? I mean, I just find it quite amazing. And this is something that, how can you pretend, and there were many white planters who have a black family and who have a white family. You know, how is it that these two sets of people don't belong together? And so I really have to wonder, what is the mental state that allows people to have such amnesia about something that's been going on for 500 years? You know, I mean, how do I have the name Robertson? How do I have the name Hickling? How do I have the name, you know, all of the names we have? Many years ago, I had a colleague, he taught me in high school. He was of Irish ancestry, but grew up in Bristol. And so once I went to England on a holiday and I met his friend, and the man said, "So what's your name?" I said, "Hillary Robertson." He said, "What?" So he really like, "Oh, I didn't know that." I said, "Didn't you know we had your names?" And he said, "No." So the final thing I want to really ask is, how is it that the people who ruled essentially England were able to ensure that the majority of people on the British Isles didn't know what was going on? I mean, how did they do it? How were they able to ensure that people didn't realize that they literally had cousins who were black or mixed race, and that there was a white side and a black side of each family? You know, how is it possible? And so I think some of that amnesia, or whatever, I don't know what you call it in psychological terms, has to be removed. So there's such shock and amazement at these black people whose name is Williams, and I'm going to use your names if you don't mind, Pinder and Blund and Ergano and Millman. Hey, we're your cousins, you know? And probably finally, I will tell you this joke. Once again, this is one of my husband's jokes, and he had many. Whichever the clan in Scotland, I think it was the Campbell clan, which is the largest Scottish family in the Caribbean, in Jamaica. And so the chief of the clan, whatever it's called, died. And this Jamaican fellow decided that he was going to apply for the job. What do you think happened? You think he got it? Hell no. But he got ready and he went off to Scotland to become the new head of the Campbell clan. So some of it is just so ludicrous. Some of it is just madness. Some of it is, I can't tell you. But we are now living in the vortex of this contradictory difficulty that really has to be resolved. No more people should die. No, people should get their whatever the amount of money that will not be enough for their life. And there should be an acknowledgement and so on that these, hostile environment, it has to stop. Okay. I don't know if there are any comments or questions.
Well, I just think that was fantastic, Hillary.
Thank you.
I'll take your mics off. I'll just, while people are thinking about what they're going to say, you were just saying about names. I was in Jamaica one time, and I was interviewing a Rasta guy, Fillmore Alvaranda, and he really well-known guy, and we're doing this bit of filming. And I introduced myself. I said, I'm Liz Millman. And I think I must have had a badge on or something. There was something that said my name. And it couldn't really start with the conversation. And he said, you're the first person I've ever met called Millman. He said, my name is Fillmore Millman Alvaranga.
What?
Goodness knows what my husband's relatives were up to. Yes, that was a funny. And going up to the little village of Pennant, where the Pennant family had their plantations, and this lovely lady called Jennifer welcomed us to show us where the great house had been. And so I said, so Jennifer, tell me, what's your other name? And she said, Williams. Well, my maiden name was Williams. So yes, you're quite right. We've and places, left the place names. You go down Hagley Park Road in Kingston. Well, I know where Hagley Park is. It was the next village to where I lived as a child in Worcestershire. But and the Mona campus, that's Anglesey. Mona is Anglesey, the name of the campus of the University of the West Indies. Just so many links. Gosh, right. So any other any responses to Hillary, David?
Yeah. Hillary, I, in the historical research that I do, I'm particularly interested in a family from near me called Robertson, and there's a huge
cousin.
And they were just like you say. There were black Robertsons and white Robertsons, and there's a huge archive of their correspondence. And I've been studying that and asking myself that these questions. How is it that people can not know or choose not to know? And I think there's something. Well, I don't have the answers, but I think two things I would say. One of the things that goes on, I think, is that distance is important. Whenever you can create a little bit of distance between you and other things, you can tell yourself the story that it always seems that the bad, even where you knew your family were involved, where all the bad things happened on somebody else's plantation.
Okay.
Or it was much worse under the Dutch, and any little bit of distance like that helps. And I think there's been some interesting work recently. Mary Fulbrook, who's written about how people in Germany have handled the legacy of the Nazi past. She says the same thing. It's always that little bit of distance that allows people to say, I wasn't, it wasn't me, it wasn't my people who were involved in the really bad things. It was somebody else. And so that's one thing. The other thing that I find goes on is, and I think it's particularly happened in Scotland, and I think this is true of Ireland and perhaps Wales. I don't know enough about Wales. But if you can tell yourself a story that you're a victim, so people will tell the story, particularly in the Highlands of Scotland, the story will be, we are also the victims of history, so we can't possibly be the same people who were involved in the victimizing. And I think that becomes the narrative. And probably the third thing, I think one of the things that happens, I think there's one of the major schools near me, I did a little bit of research on it. In 1804, almost 1 in 10 of the pupils at Inverness Royal Academy was from the Caribbean. Now, I don't know, they weren't all black, but certainly a number of them were. And so it was a far more racially mixed society in the north of Scotland then than it was afterwards. And as soon as that visual presence begins to disappear, I think it again becomes very easy for people. So, in general, Scotland didn't, people from the Windrush didn't come to Scotland. But,
No.
So there are lots of parts of Britain that haven't had the visual presence of black people in their communities, and I think that made these other things more difficult, more easy. We're victims as well. It happened somewhere else. It happened at a distance. So, but that's only a very partial explanation.
Yes. I want to bring something to on another angle. One of the ways in which people were divided and conquered, and I've gotten to know an Indian, a Sikh Canadian woman, a third generation Canadian woman, just talking to me about India, and that has just opened my mind to so many other things on a scale that I can't even conceive. So you're looking at the issue of race, and you're looking at caste, and you're looking at so on. In our situation, the issue of class, which I think is embedded in the British way of life, is something that we have real difficulty unpacking. So I wanted to just think about the following in terms of that difference, where you fall in the hierarchy. And I'm going to use two examples. Britain itself, especially England, did not provide much for its working class people. And so many of them were forced to find ways of going out to the colonies to make their names and make their lives. So that is one set of issues, because still unresolved in England are the issues of social class. Now I am able to be tuned in the same way I can listen to Caribbean accents and know who comes from Grenada or this place or which part of Jamaica. I can tell. So you are from Inverness, are you?
Yes,
You're Scottish.
yes.
I would not dare to approach an Irish person to say which part of England you are from, because I know that that is heresy. I mean, like, what are you saying? Are you mad? I am not English. So there are some unresolved issues on those islands, which people, of course, don't talk about. And of course, how you speak and who, when I lived in Birmingham, it came a day when somebody said to me, "Were you born in Birmingham?" I said to my husband, "My love, we have to get out of this place." Can you imagine me having a Brummie accent? Oh my God, I cannot believe this. This is how all the accents to have, a Brummie accent. Say, oh no, gotta get out of this place. Okay, so we know the markers of social class, and we pretend that they don't exist, but they really do exist. So that is now part of the challenge that we have. What happens is when the people from the colonies now come to Britain, they are being confronted with a number of things. And in fact, it is in this diaspora that many of the more radical ideas are generated. So your Pan-African conferences, so when you meet the people who have gone to study law and history, the few who get into university and so on, and they are now in Manchester or in London or in Edinburgh, they get together and talk for the first time because they were of the impression of something else. So actually, and in fact, somebody who was being provocative said that England was the third largest Caribbean island. Can you put your mind around that one? Put your mind around that one. Because when the people came there, for the first time, they were talking about this common experience of being in this diaspora. On top of that, no, my grandfather, my father's father, was a man from the country, went and he was in the First World War. No, we have never discussed that because, of course, I couldn't even understand what that meant when I was a child. I think he returned to Jamaica with shell shock. I believe that, as did many people, because he was a very strange person. So that was my father's father. My mother's brother went and joined the Royal Derby Regiment. No, we don't know what happened, but something did, never spoken about. And so the people have been participating in different ways in the life of this Britain. But it doesn't seem to understand or welcome or even acknowledge their existence in the world. It's pretty amazing. So I can tell you, I studied in the British Isles. I know where Inverness is. I know all kind of things. In fact, my school is called the Queen's School, named after Elizabeth. And the houses are Victoria and Mary and Alexandria. Hello! And I was in Victoria House. Can you believe that a Jamaican girl in 2021 even conceives of what this is about? And it's, of course, it's an Anglican school, so it has the Queen's beasts as the motifs on the door. So at 21, I went to England and I visited some friends of mine, and we went to Kew Gardens and we saw the Queen's beasts. And let me tell you now, we fell on the ground and we were almost hysterical. And I think if somebody looked at us, they'd think, these are some more crazy Black people. What the hell is this all about? What the hell? And listen, I know so many things about England and Scotland and Wales and all that. And guess what? How can I know about daffodils and not know about hibiscus? You see, the thing is just totally ludicrous. It's ridiculous. You know, there's so many things that you know, which of course you don't have to know in order to survive. But this is part of the problem, that this constant feeding in of these ideas. Now we're having a discussion about Clark's shoes. In the last general election, the prime minister, who is trying to be a with it young man, got a pair of Clark shoes in the color of the political party. I am saying, hell, we're just making some more white people rich. Because in fact, there's no whole Jamaican set of Clark's shoes. Hello, this is ridiculous. How many of you wear Clark shoes? David, you wear Clark shoes? Simon, you wear Clark shoes? You do? You do?
Absolutely, yes.
Simon, you wear Clark shoes?
I do.
Wow. Lucy, you wear Clark shoes?
No.
Boodman, you wear Clark shoes? Liz?
Bunry's in Canada. Bunry's in Canada.
But hey, they have Clark shoes in Canada and in America too, you know.
Me.
Oh yes, they do. So here it is in Jamaica, and there's a big debate. And these shoes are very expensive. Excuse me. Hello, Africa.
All right, I'm going to have some others to ask you some questions if it's not about Clark shoes. Professor Sati, would you like to come in at this point? Now, Professor Sati's in Jos, Nigeria.
Okay.
Okay, so
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much, Liz, and thank you, Hilary.
Hi.
Starting with the last one, Clark's shoes. It is for Clark's shoes are for very rich people in Nigeria. It's really a class shoe, nearly a synonym for Clark's itself. So I myself have not been able to afford a Clark's shoes in my life. Another thing is you talked about how people could live for 500 years together in marriage, in family, and yet not be integrated. And it reminds me of what one English poet said. And he said, marriage is the only war in which you sleep with the enemy.
Oops.
So it means that these marriages and families were just to fulfill certain social things, but the integration that should have come with those marriages never did occur. But a third point related to people coming to the UK or to Britain to look for jobs, and then they would find themselves poorly paid, and then would find it very difficult to socialize.
Hilary, turn your microphone off, will you? Just turn your microphone.
I can listen and mute.
Okay, they found it very difficult to integrate into English society. And that reminds me of the opposite of this kind of situation in Jos, Nigeria. There is this book titled Strangers to the City, Urban Man in Jos. And in that book, the author tries to see that in Africa and in Nigeria, there's this thing we call social capital, in which people from the same ethnic group, once they come to the city, they look for their own kith and kin, and those people provide them the first cushion to stay and adapt. Before they find jobs, before they stabilize, those who are already in the city provide them such cushions. And it appears the opposite was true for the migrants to the UK. And it's quite strange for me, if these people are Blacks, did they not have a sense of community life, or they had been so uprooted from African cultures that that accommodation was not available?
I think what was interesting was that so great was the hostility after the Second World War to any incomers, I believe, into to Britain. Britons had been told to be afraid of anybody coming in. And I was a child after the war, but there was still that thing about an alien. We had an au pair girl, she was learning English, and the local policeman came in 1958, considerably after the Second World War, to check up on the alien. You know, people were afraid. So when people came into the country, it wasn't just Black people, it was Irish people as well, and any other people who were trying to come into the country. It was getting that first foothold because there weren't already people staying in and after that, I think people did gravitate towards family members, and so some people went, say, down to Swansea or to Cardiff or to Sheffield or to Birmingham, or new people in parts of London. And so the communities are now sort of developed. And in a place like Wolverhampton, for example, a lot of Jamaican people from Hanover settled in Wolverhampton. So they have a Hanover Society in Wolverhampton now and support one another. But yes, that's interesting points. Hilary, do you want to come back in on that?
We will have our participant here whose hands I will hold so he won't click anything. But this, as I said, the strange thing is, if you believe you belong to something and then you have been under this illusion, it's, you know, and then you find out that you don't. So it's okay to be a member of the Hanover Society, but you thought you were British. There was nothing called Jamaican, I don't think, you know. There was this notion of this nation is really the problem. Who are we? And in fact, I think there are a lot of people who become Jamaican when they go away because they realize they don't belong. So in other words, can I be Scottish? Can I be Italian? Can I be even American, which is now, of course, the big... Can I be those things? And so we're having a lot of confusion in people's heads about their identity. I was just reading about something called social identity, some new set of theories and so. You know, now that I'm retired, I'm not paying too much attention to some of this stuff, I have to tell you. I have to confess that to you. But how can you be a global citizen, and how can you fit into these different places? So at what time do you become Scottish? Or can you be Scottish if you live in Montreal 5 generations later? You know what I'm saying? So Mr. Biden is being described as being Irish, I think. Okay, you go over there soon, come on, all right? But tell them bye-bye. Bye. Okay, and see you later. Tell them see you later. Bye. So, all right, you wait for me. But this is part of the thing. When do you become whatever it is? And the fact is that some of the people they believe that from the time they were born, they were that thing. But you see, then there are consequences to this identity, because it means, can you get a job? Can you live somewhere? Can you claim citizenship with a passport, or is it a problem? So then this becomes a real difficulty. And I like the point about the social capital that the Nigerian is able to have, because the Nigerian's name has remained the same. The Nigerian is part of a particular community. The person in the Americas is now under an assumed name, literally. So there are Millmans and Alstons and, you know, Ferrigno. Simon, is that correct?
Faringo.
Faringo,
So,
yeah.
So part of what it is that you think you have become this person, but are you an imposter? so there are the identity issues, and of course you can't think about that every day. Bye-bye. See you later.
All right. Well, just at this moment, Hillary, what I'm going to suggest is we wrap this session up, finish the recording. Thank everybody very much indeed. So Dr. Hillary Robertson Hickling, thank you so much for your efforts from there. Don't go away. We're just going to stop the recording. Okay. Thank you very much.